Hi, my name's Stuart Lynch. In this video, we're going to go beyond the basics of custom container views in SwiftUI and dive into what was new in iOS 18. And this includes section subviews and the powerful ContainerValue struct. I recently created a video that reviewed custom container views as they were prior to WWDC 24. I'll leave a link in the description, and I recommend that you watch that video first, as I'm not going to be doing a lot of detail here in that topic specifically. What I do plan to cover is the two new options that were introduced at WWDC 24 for iOS 18 and higher. And that's the ability to work with subviews of a section, including the headers, the content, and the footers, and the addition of a new ContainerValues struct. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can transform these two rather bland list views here that we have in this tab view. The first one is sectioned, while the second one is not. We'll be using a custom container view that's going to allow us to completely revamp those list views, as you can see here in the first view. And in the second, we'll perform some grouping magic and use a custom container value to raise up one of our new sections to the top by way of a picker. I have a starter project for this video, so if you want to work along with me, you can find it on GitHub. A link's in the description. The starter project branch contains the starter project. The completed branch contains the completed source code, so make sure you download the zip file for the starter branch. So let's get started. This list view in the sample view is a sectioned list view here, where I have used a different overload each time to create the section. Sometimes just a title key for the header, and other times a view. And I've only once used a footer. In addition, the content in the third section is a for each loop construction. So instead of using a list, let's create a custom container and pass in the content in sections. So let's begin by creating a custom container view right here in this file so that we can see changes in our preview. Outside of the sample view, create a custom list container struct. And we can use generics here and specify content with a capital C, that is a view, and the custom list container conforms to the view protocol. We start with a view builder to create the variable content with a lowercase c, and that is the capital C content, a view. And this is all covered in that introductory video. Now, because it conforms to the view protocol, it requires a view that returns some view, and I'm just going to return the content for now. So I'm going to return to our original sample view and replace the list in the sample view to a custom list container. And things change drastically as it's no longer a list. However, we can go back now to our custom list container and embed that content in a list, and then we're back to square one. Well, what I want to do now, though, is to replace the content with a group, where you can construct the group from the sections of the given view, and that view will be the content that we are passing in to our container view. And this will give us sections, which is a collection that we can iterate through. And since that sections is a collection, we can use a for each loop to get each one individual section as that iterator. Now, each section could possibly have a header, content, and footer. If we add these now, everything will just look the same, and you can't distinguish between the content, the header, and the footer. But we can stylize each component separately. For example, for the header, let's apply a title font, add some leading padding, apply a frame with a max width of infinity and an alignment of leading, and then set the background to a color of teal, but also apply the gradient. And then set the foreground style to white. I'll just leave the content alone for now, and let's go to the footer. Here, I'm simply going to apply a frame with a max width of infinity and a trailing alignment. I'll set the font to a caption and then apply a secondary foreground style. So if there is no footer, nothing happens, but you see the footer is now with a caption off to the right for that final section. Now the section content is laid out vertically, just as you would expect. You can, however, do whatever you like with this content, as the section.content is itself a collection of subviews. So we could rewrite this using a for each loop on that section content to get each subview as an iterator, and we can call that view, and then we can stylize that view any way that we like. For example, we could change the default rendering of the views, which is a V stack, into an H stack. Well, this doesn't look great for the third section, so I'm going to surround the H stack with a horizontal scroll view. Now this is better, but even those sections that don't need to scroll, scroll. So we can add a scroll bounce behavior based on size for the horizontal axis. Now only content that needs to scroll will scroll. Let's also hide the scroll indicators. Well, since each subview itself is exposed, you can do whatever you want with that view to stylize it. So for example, we could add some horizontal padding, set the foreground style to white, and then apply a background of the color green inside a rounded rectangle with a corner radius of 7. Now you can get pretty creative here. So let's just cut out this entire custom list container now and move it to its own file. So I'm going to create a new folder called Custom Container Views. I'll paste what we have on the clipboard and import SwiftUI. So back in our sample view, we see that everything is still working just fine. If you're enjoying this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment. And make sure you subscribe to my channel and enable notifications. You can also subscribe to my weekly newsletter. I'll leave a link in the description. The newsletter will provide you with more information about my latest videos, along with what's coming up, plus some extra bonus material. Now, if you enjoy my content and want to support my work, you can buy me a coffee. If you really enjoy it, you can become a monthly subscriber and receive early access to all of my videos before they're released on YouTube. In the second example, I've got a to-do list view. And the view uses the to-do model and a static array of mock to-dos that you see in the to-do list models folder in this file. There is an ID property. The item is a string, and there's a completed Boolean value that is toggled by the button in the H stack in our view. And that mock to-dos is used to create the state variable called all to-dos so that we're able to update the value and have the view refreshed. What our list currently doesn't use is the project property, and that's an enum with 4 cases representing some category. So what I want to do is reorganize our list in sections using the categories as our sections, and then create a custom container view to stylize it, plus introduce the concept of container values. So in order to break out our list up into sections, we'll need to group the data based on the project category. And the easiest way to do this is to create a dictionary where the key is the project and the value is an array of to-dos that represent the to-dos in that category. So fortunately, there's a nice dictionary function that will do that for us. And this is the grouping by function. So after the state property, create a computed property called grouped to-dos that is a dictionary of type project as the key, and as I mentioned, the value is an array of to-do items. And then inside the content, you can return the dictionary by grouping all to-dos And for the by, you can tap enter to get a to-do iterator. And what you can do is simply specify that you want to group on for each to-do, and that is the to-do.project property. Now you'll often see this reduced to simply using the shorthand $0.project and leave the to-do in out completely. Well, you can then, within the list view, enclose the current for each group in another for each loop that will iterate over all the cases of the project enum, since it's case iterable, to get a project iterator. And then you can enclose the inner for each loop once again in a section where you can use the project's display name as the header label. The internal for each loop, however, is not all to-dos anymore. It's the value, which is the array of dictionary, where the key is the project. This is optional though, so we'll need to use a nil coalescer to provide an empty array. Now this will never fail for us though, but we still need it because of the optional state. Our view is now sectioned nicely in this list view, and we can toggle the status of the to-dos within each section. What I want to do though is to be able to specify which of these sections should be at the top of the list. So I'm going to create a new state property called selected project as a project and give it a default of SwiftUI app case. Then above the list, I'm going to create a labeled content view where the title is the string priority. And for the content, we can use a trailing closure syntax and create a picker. And that picker will have a title key of select the project, which is only going to be used for accessibility needs. But that selection will be bound to the selected project. For the content, we'll use a for each loop over the project's all cases to get a project iterator. And then we can display the project display name in a text view. But for the tag, we'll need to specify it's the actual project iterator. Let's also apply a button style of bordered to the picker and add some horizontal padding to the labeled content view. We're all set now, but nothing happens when we make a selection. Before we create our custom container, we'll need to create a container value so that we can specify which of the sections can be made the priority section. Now, a container value is like an environment value, and we can create them the same way. We can use the entry macro on an extension of ContainerValues struct, just as you can with environment values. I recently created a video on this topic, so I'll leave a link in the description if you need to get a review. So below our view, create an extension for ContainerValues. Inside there, you'll just use the entry macro to create a variable called top priority, and it's going to be a Boolean type that's going to require a default value, so we'll specify false. Now, if you had individual sections, you can go to each section and apply the container value manually to the section. So for example, here, we'll just apply the container value, and it's going to require a key path, which is the top priority. And let's specify it to be true. So in this case, then every single one of our sections would be top priority, but that's not the case. The only one that we want to be a top priority is the one project that matches our selected project. This then will apply false to all of the sections except that one where the project matches our selected project. So now we can go and define our custom container. So let's create one in the same view right after the ContainerValues extension. And then this should be a familiar process now, so if you watch the previous videos on custom containers, this should go quickly. We create a struct called project container view using the generic capital C content, which is a view, and it conforms to the view protocol. We'll create a view builder for a var called lowercase content, which is that uppercase content type of view. And in the body, we'll need some view. So we'll just replace the content to get started. So as before, I'm going to go back up to our list view, and I'm going to change that now to be a project container view. Of course, it's going to mess up. So back in the project container view, let's get it working again by embedding that content in a list. Well, in order to access the container values, though, as we just learned, we'll need to be able to access our sections. So we'll replace the content with a group where the sections are our lowercase content. That's going to get us that sections collection that we can iterate over. And we can use then a for each loop, because it's a collection, to get a single section. Inside that loop, then we'll create a section header and use a for each loop on the section's content to get the view. I'm not using any footers at all in this section. We'll come back to doing styling in a minute, but in the meantime, we'll need to be able to find which of our sections is the priority, and there's a couple of ways of doing this. Before the for each loop within our sections, we could use a filter to find the sections where the container value's top priority is true and which ones are false, and create two separate variables and a for each loop to display each one differently. Or we could simply sort by top priority container value to get all true on the top. But I'm going to take the first approach, as I think that's easier to understand. After we have our sections collections, create two new properties. For the first one, we'll call it priority sections, even though there's only going to be one. And we find that by taking the sections collection and filtering it where the iterator $0's container values top priority is true. We could go equals true, but because it's Boolean, it's either going to be true or false. So we can just leave it like this. For the second one, then, it's the other ones, and that's the case where it's not the container value's top priority. So other sections is equal to sections filtered by not $0 container values top priority. So now we've got two different arrays. So instead of there being only one for each loop here, there's going to be two, each iterating over the filtered array. So we'll start with the priority sections. And when I do that, all I see is the priority one. And you can see if I change the picker in the preview, just that section is displayed. So we can see our picker is actually working. Now I want to see the remaining sections below it though. So I'm going to create a second for each loop exactly as the first one, but I'll change the for each loop now to iterate over the other sections. Well, when we change that picker, the change is quite abrupt. So we'll need to make that change in the container view so that the change is going to be triggered based on the change in the selected value in our presenting view. So this means that we'll need to add a binding to our project container view, and we'll do that before the content variable. So we'll set a binding called selected project that will be of type project. And then we can add an animation to our container view using a default animation if you like, or any one you want, but the value is going to be dependent on the selected project. Now our preview is broken though until we pass in that state property of the selected project as a binding up in our view. Now as you change the picker selection, you'll get a nice transition. However, if you're at the bottom of the list, you might want it to scroll to the top too. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to return to the project container view. And for our list, I'm going to need to wrap that inside a scroll view reader so that we can get the proxy. And where we want it to scroll to is the top header. So we can apply an ID to that section header in the priority list and just give it a fixed string of top, because there's only ever going to be one of these ones. With that in place, then we can add an onChanged modifier that watches for changes on the selected project. And you can do this right here. And then we can create a with animation block where you can use the proxies scroll to method to scroll to the ID, which is the string top. This gives us what we want. So finally, now we can choose how we want to format each of the sections in each of our different for each loops. So for example, in the priority section, let's do this for the header, applying a font of a large title. We'll add some leading padding, a frame of max width infinity, an alignment of leading, a background of mint with a gradient. I'm also going to set some padding to the top of just 5 and a foreground style of white. And I'd like to hide the list row separator just for the header. And then for the view content itself, just for this top priority, I'm going to set the font to a Title II size so it stands out. Now for the other sections, I'm simply going to copy the same header modifiers as above, but I'm going to change the header's background color to a gray gradient. And I'm just going to leave the section content views alone. Now we've kept these separators in the content rows, but they start with the text. That's the default. I'd like them to extend to the beginning of the row and be the same color as our header background. To do this, then, we can apply an alignment guide where the horizontal alignment is actually the list row separator leading. Now we don't need the dimension because we're simply going to set it to 0. And then to change the color, we'll apply a list row separator tint of mint. So I can take both of these modifiers now and apply them to the other section, but change the tint color to gray. Great. We can now switch between projects so that the priority one is on the top and is more prominently displayed, and it all handles this very nice and smoothly. So let's cut out the container values and project container struct now. Oops, looks like I hadn't selected that folder when I pasted in that first container view. So let me move it in here now. And now I can select it again and simply paste what's on my clipboard. Creates a new file, and I'll need to import SwiftUI. So I hope that you've learned something in this video now that you can possibly use in your projects going forward. If you found this tutorial helpful, please give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment. You can subscribe to my channel to get notifications of new videos. And remember that you can also download my YouTube channel listing app for free and quick access to all of my 350 plus YouTube videos. A link's in the description. And also remember I have a full SwiftUI course available on my Teachable site where you learn how to build a fun multi-targeted app.